Good morning. This sermon is for Sunday, November 9th, 2025. It's the 22nd Sunday after Pentecost. This morning's children's talk, which I borrowed from the excellent pandemic era work of our colleagues at St. Mark's Ocean Park, does an excellent job of highlighting one of the key parts of understanding today's gospel passage. The question that the Sadducees put to Jesus is a trick question. It's a question that is supposed to trap Jesus into saying something that makes the whole idea of the resurrection seem foolish, because the Sadducees had already decided that it was foolish. There are a couple of other things worth noting here, though. This passage is one of several in the Gospel of Luke where different groups of Jewish leaders, or individual Jewish leaders, approach Jesus as he is teaching in the temple in the days before his arrest. It's important to the author of the Gospel of Luke that we see Jesus as a rabbi who can stand on his own against various kinds of theological debate. The second thing that is worth noting here is that this idea that a woman would be married to every brother in a family is rooted in a real practice. But even so, it's an exaggeration of the practice. There was a custom at the time of Jesus that a man might marry his widowed sister-in-law. It was a way to protect the woman in a patriarchal system, and a way to ensure that the family's line, particularly if there was already an heir, and a way to keep the family's wealth within the family, if you will. If she were to return to her original birth family, she might take portions of her dowry with her. If she were to marry another man who was not part of the family, again, the wealth might be spread more thinly, if you will. So it was a custom that was rooted in the reality that people died. People died to this day. And so, in a way, it's a question that is about the fear of death. And Jesus' answer to the question the Sadducees pose. I should go back. The other thing about it, though, is that it's not really very likely that a woman would run through every 7 brothers in every family. Probably if they were losing men that quickly, at some point they would have made a different kind of choice, a different way of coping. So, the Sadducees pose this question, and Jesus answers not by actually going into the details of the question. He's not really interested in what would happen to this woman or to these men. He's interested in what's happening under the question, this kind of fear of death and this idea that perhaps we could use the rules of this world in the life of the resurrection. Jesus thinks that's a ridiculous thing to do, that the rules that we've created to navigate life in this world, rules that we need, that work for us here and now, those rules are just irrelevant when it comes to the life of the resurrection. Partly, he makes it plain that the question, whose wife will she be, misses the point that she is herself a whole human being. She is a child of God in the resurrection, and that's the identity that will matter the most. Now look, some of you may have further questions. For a lot of us, the idea that we are reunited with loved ones in the afterlife is big. It's important. It gives us hope when we are feeling hopeless. It gives us something to hold on to in the midst of grief. And some of us have witnessed deaths where the presence of a previously passed loved one felt palpable in the room. And I don't think that Jesus' answers to the Sadducees are to suggest to us that we wouldn't be connected to loved ones in the life of the resurrection. But I think it might mean that our particular way of being connected, the concerns we have about that kind of connection here and now, might be fundamentally different in the afterlife. I think they might be more deeply rooted in God's love for each one of us and for all of us as a collective. I don't know that there's a lot of harm, really, in envisioning the afterlife, as long as it's bringing us comfort and joy. I think it's understandable, after all, that we would want to know what life in the resurrection might look like. Maybe it will be fluffy clouds with toga wearing fellow angels and lutes to play, or perhaps it will be a giant long table of a feast where we will eat our fill, but always have room for another mouthful of something delicious. Maybe it will feel much like this world, with all of its struggle and pain removed, and hopefully that means that there will also be no dirty dishes and no laundry. When I was a child, one of the few sermons I remember being delivered to a group of us as children was about how, in the resurrection, we would all eat with spoons as long as our arms. So that the only way that we would all be able to eat would be if we were fed by one another. I think sometimes the value of allowing our imaginations to run wild with images of what the life of the resurrection might be like is because the life of the resurrection, Jesus teaches us, begins now. It begins in his resurrection on Easter morning and is lived out in the life of the church over the last 2,000 years. Not fully, there's a piece of it that we can't quite get to just yet, but we're supposed to start. And so we need all of those imaginings of what that life might be like so that we can begin to live as if it's already happening. I do think that part of the promise of the resurrection isn't just that we get more time on the other side of death, but that we get a different kind of time on the other side of death. I suspect that there is a quality of the presence of God that we simply cannot get our heads around, maybe even couldn't physically manage in our bodies on this side of death, and this piece of things. And I wonder if in the fullness of the resurrection, when the fullness of time comes, if in that moment we might get so much more than the glimpses we have of God's presence in this world, that we might actually get the fullness of God's presence that we simply couldn't comprehend now. To me, that feels like a promise that is big enough to hang the fullness of our faith on. This idea that there is something more that we will get. Because I find the glimpses that we get now of God's unconditional love for each one of us and for all of us pretty compelling. And the vision of a world that comes when we embrace our role as children of God, first and foremost, is a world where space is made for all, where love and peace prevail, where we get to be who we most fundamentally are, children of God, and embracing that role as fully as possible. One of the commentators I read this week suggested that what Jesus does in this passage is take a trick question and turn it into a pep talk. And I want to give you that pep talk. I know, this commentator suggests that Jesus was saying, I know we are walking through the valley of the shadow of death, and that the fear of death is palpable. But do not be afraid, for you are children of the resurrection, and you can carry yourself as such, not only in the age to come, but even now. Be emboldened, be strong, be assured, be poised, for come what may, God will not let you go, any more than God has let Abraham and Sarah go. To God, all of them are alive. Listen, you shall not seek death, but neither shall you fear it. For the God of Abraham and Sarah, the God of the widow and the orphan, is not just the God of the dead, but the God of the living. It's not just the God of those who've come before us, but is our God, available to us now and in the life of the resurrection to come. Amen.